Should the pastor know what people give? This is the most frequently asked question I get from people trying to grow stewardship in their congregations. People are afraid that someone will get upset if the pastor knows what others give. Other congregations celebrate that only one person, the financial secretary, knows people's giving history. Some fear that the pastor will treat the generous people better than the non-generous. There's much anxiety wrapped up in this question. I don't have a one-size-fits-all approach, but yes, I think the pastor should know what people give. And I think we need to clarify the difference between confidentiality and secrecy. In all these discussions, nobody ever asks, are people offended that the pastor has not acknowledged their generosity? Or, I wonder if people need accountability in order to break free from their fears of truly being generous. One of my favorite quotes comes from the Reverend Martin Luther King Sr. He preached in a sermon that the practice of anonymous giving leads to the practice of anonymous non-giving. If there is no accountability for what people give, there is no reason people should challenge themselves to give more. Perhaps this is what has led to the median Protestant giving being less than 1% of income to charity every year. At one time, it was the practice of my congregation that we would fill out a pledge form, stuff it in an envelope, and nobody would open it. But it would be mailed back to us in the late spring the following year. Over time, I realized this practice reinforced a mentality that giving was between me and God. Well, it may be true that giving is between me and God, but where is the space for God's voice in the conversation? Isn't the church talking about its dreams for new ministry part of the voice of God in the conversation? Isn't the pastor saying, could you consider an extra $3 per week, part of the voice of God being in the conversation? If we leave the conversation to ourselves and the piece of paper, we may mistake our voice for the voice of God in challenging us to consider growing in generosity. Back to the Dr. Martin Luther King quote, I would also ask, what is wrong with accountability? I remember in high school, I had an accountability partner that checked in with me regularly about my prayer life and my daily devotional habits. It helped me develop a discipline in those areas. We can teach people to develop a spiritual giving habit through accountability. Jesus says in Matthew 6:21 that where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. This teaches us that when we guide people into a practice of giving accountability, we are investing in the ministry of the church as a matter of the heart. I think pastors should be involved in the matters of the hearts of their members. Giving patterns change in the lives of people when major activities take place in their lives. A couple will often stop giving when they are considering a divorce. I would like the pastor to know about that before it is too late. If someone begins to have anxiety about a potential layoff, they often hold back on their giving. The pastor could provide care during that time. People often feel guilty when financial circumstances dictate that they decrease their giving, and the pastor could have a role in alleviating that feeling of guilt. Additionally, people often give a windfall gift when they get a promotion. I would like the pastor to be able to celebrate with that event. Others increase giving when they pay off a major debt or come to a deeper understanding of God's presence in their lives. Again, these are activities the pastor can be involved in. Recently, I had a conversation with a congregation where the pastor has historically not known the giving of members. Their second largest donor had not yet made a gift this year. In each of the previous 2 years, this particular member had provided over $20,000 each year. The pastor doesn't know who this donor is. Therefore, he doesn't have the capacity to have a conversation to find out if they are going to give this year or not. He doesn't know if they are upset or if they simply forgot. Through transparent giving, we can equip the pastor to have a conversation with this member. If this member doesn't give this year, it is possible that staff will get laid off from the church. In order to function and thrive as a congregation, we need pastors to know what people give. Regarding my own giving, I remember one time when we had stretched to give the largest gift we had ever given to any organization. The pastor wrote a personal note on the thank you letter. It sticks out to me that our generosity was appreciated. It is nice to be thanked. There isn't a college president in America or leader of a charitable organization who doesn't know the giving history of their donors. Knowing this information helps leaders guide and strengthen their organizations. Pastors are called to serve all members of the congregation regardless of what they give. We need to trust our pastors will be strengthened, not discouraged, by knowing more about congregational giving. So yes, I think the pastor should know. Most generous people want their pastor to know, and many people are relieved when they can talk about money openly with their pastor, both those with resources and those without. There is a tradition around anonymous giving that needs to change in our congregations, and you can be one of those leading that change. If your congregation currently does not share donor information with the pastor, I don't suggest making a big deal about the transition. My favorite tactic is for the pastor to simply sign one of the quarterly statements in blue ink so that it is obvious that now the pastor knows. I often suggest that the council president be informed that this change in practice is taking place, but is not something that should be debated and discussed. Ultimately, however, each pastor has their own style, and each congregation has their own dynamics that must be considered with an issue like this. Next, in addition to the pastor, I believe that at least one member of the stewardship team should also be aware of the giving data in a congregation. Otherwise, it puts too much burden on the pastor to put the stewardship drive together. This person must be generous themselves and be fully aware of how to keep confidential information confidential. The Apostle Paul writes in his first letter to the Corinthians, "Think of us this way, as servants of Christ and stewards of God's mysteries. Moreover, it is required of stewards that they be trustworthy." When we lead stewardship in a trustworthy way, we invite others into open and loving community. We know who to call in the congregation if we need a funeral meal provided or someone to schedule acolytes. This person on the stewardship team simply becomes who we call when we need to talk to people about money. It is part of our spiritual discipline. We need to stop hiding it behind a veil of secrecy. When we expand to someone on the stewardship team knowing, we can better ask people for their gift, and everyone likes to be asked. Our leadership and transparent, joyful stewardship is one of the greatest gifts we can offer others in our faith community. We invite others into prayerful conversation about placing their treasure and finding their heart right in the ministries that we are engaged.